Bye.
With feeling.
Oh, hello there! Yes, you are seeing things correctly. I do in fact now have my own cartoon avatar which I plan to use within videos from now on. It's something that I've wanted to have for a while now, and it's finally here. And I felt like the best way to introduce it would be through the discussion of a furry movie which I've wanted to talk about since first watching it. And seeing as I highly doubt it will be getting a Best Animated Feature nomination next year, considering its upcoming competition, I figured that I may as well give a standalone review instead. So, without further ado, let's discuss my feelings on Goat. The Goat is a 1921 silent comedy short film directed by and starring Buster Keaton, one of my personal favourite actors. I love basically all of Keaton's work, but The Goat is one of my personal favourites from him. It is chock full of banger joke after banger joke, and the whole thing is still hilarious 105 years later. Bro, that elevator scene just breaks me every time, and my goodness, I don't think any other actor has ever had as much aura as Buster Keaton on the front of that train. He is just so damn cool. 10 out of 10, one of my favourite short films, would recommend to everyone. Okay, there was only so long I could keep that bit up for. Obviously, I'm not talking about a Buster Keaton short within this video, although I wouldn't be opposed to doing that, as every compliment that I gave it was 100% genuine. However, I am instead going to spend the rest of this video reviewing a recent mainstream animated film which is much more in line with my channel's identity. And that is, of course, 2026's Goat, created by Sony Pictures Animations and directed by Tyree Dillehay. Based on the unpublished story Funky Dunks by Chris Tugas, the film follows a little goat called Will Harris who gets his chance to play Major League Rawball, which is basically just basketball but cooler. And like many underdog protagonists in sports movies, he faces adversity from other players, including from Will's idol, Jett, the biggest player on the team, but over the course of the film, Will proves himself and is able to help the team to win the championship. So yeah, a pretty standard plot for a sports movie overall. Now, I remember being really hyped for Goat when that first trailer dropped. I thought that the animation looked stylish as hell, the premise seemed fun, and I felt like there was a lot that you could do with an animated sports movie. Now, I'll say right away that I'm not actually the biggest fan of sports movies, as I find a lot of them too self-serious, cliche, and boring for my liking. But Goat looked like one that I would actually enjoy. And then the film came out, and whilst I know a lot of people watched it, I mean it did do really well at the box office after all, I don't really see it talked about all that much today. You obviously had many reviews which came out back in February around the time of its release, but I feel like everyone almost immediately pivoted to talking about other things after that initial hype died down. And I think the reason for why that happened is pretty obvious. Goat didn't gravitate to everyone in the same way that a lot of other recent animated movies, particularly Sony movies, have done. It's not as popular as the Spider-Verse movies or the Mitchells vs. the Machines, and it's definitely not as culturally impactful as K-pop Demon Hunters. Instead, it exists on its own as a movie which some people really enjoyed, and some people didn't. In fact, I've heard many people argue that this is actually Sony's worst movie in years, and whilst I wouldn't quite use words that harsh, I kinda agree. I definitely don't think that Goat is as good as Sony's other recent masterpieces, as I think it contains a lot of clear issues, and I can understand why it wouldn't work for some. Yet strangely enough, this film has not left my mind, and I'm not entirely sure why. This film didn't deeply impact me personally or anything, yet it's still one that I constantly think back on fondly, so much so that I happily picked up its Blu-ray release without hesitation as I just really fancied rewatching it. And after that rewatch, I decided to make this video so that I can talk about this film in more depth, because at the end of the day, whilst I stand by a lot of my criticisms that I've made towards this movie, I ultimately just find it really fun, and it's one that I can see myself happily returning to in the future as well. But why is that? I literally just said that I don't like sports movies, and this is an especially cliche one, so why do I like it? Well, that's what I'm going to try to answer by the end of this video, whilst also giving you my full thoughts on the film as a whole. But first things first, I feel like I ought to immediately go over the flaws that I and many other people have with this film, so that you can understand why I don't personally consider Goat to be top tier. Also, if we start with my issues, we can end the video on a much more positive note. But either way, I'd say that one of the biggest issues that plagues this film is its pacing. Now, normally when I criticise a film's pacing, it's because I find it too slow. However, Goat has the opposite problem for me. It is way too fast. This film speedruns through so many scenes and it really doesn't need to. The characters are constantly talking to the point that there's this consistent back and forth with them all, but it doesn't allow for the scene to actually breathe. It is constantly just a zip zip zip, and I find it a bit too overwhelming. And this isn't actually an issue exclusive to this film, as I had the exact same problem with K-pop Demon Hunters, and now I'm starting to wonder whether this is becoming a common Sony problem. But at least with K-pop, it largely felt fast because you could tell that a lot of its story had to be cut down. But with GOAT, it's already a simple story that can easily be told in less than 2 hours, so why is every scene on double speed? Now, on the one hand, I can understand why things ended up this way from a practical perspective, as animation takes a lot of time and costs a lot of money, so the shorter the runtime, the less animation that you have to do. That makes sense. But then again, there are other movies with a similar runtime and nowhere near the same pacing issues, and clearly this team doesn't care about making things easier for themselves, as if they did, the film wouldn't look as good as it does. Therefore, I actually feel like the film's pace was purposely designed in a way to try and maintain a kid's attention within a world of short-form content. I hate to say it, but I feel like these quicker paces may become a pattern, and I think that's a real shame, as I think that kids are smart enough to be able to sit with films that aren't this high energy, and will therefore be able to take in these slower and more emotional beats. And whilst I think there are effective emotional beats within this film, I don't know if the overall package is quite as effective as it could have been, due to its overall quick pace. Although to give credit where it's due, I can at least say that I was never bored whilst watching GOAT. It always kept me engaged, and there are times where its high energy did add a lot to the experience, particularly during the games. And it does also add a lot to the comedy sometimes. Although with that said, I did admittedly find the comedy a bit hit and miss here. Now, some of the jokes are brilliant, but some are a little bit weak and overly juvenile for my liking. Now, I get that this is made for a slightly younger audience than something like Spider-Verse, so I shouldn't go in expecting masterful writing, but come on, this studio also made The Mitchells vs. the Machines, and that was way funnier when it came to making social media related jokes, so why is this film's attempts kinda cringy by comparison? Oh, and speaking of cringe, it's 2026 and this movie still felt the need to make a screaming goat joke? Come on, are you serious? Granted, it only appeared once, which is much less than I expected going in, but still. Oh, and some of the product placements here are really egregious. I mean, Hana's PlayStation shirt is kinda cute, but things like the cars and bloody DoorDash are so in your face that it's really annoying. But, I would argue that the biggest problem with this film outside of its pacing is just how standard and cliche its plot is. Put simply, this is a really bog-standard sports movie, and that's likely why it didn't leave much of an impact on many people, as it doesn't do much to really stand out narratively. I mean, let's put it this way. How many sports movies follow this type of formula? A rookie underdog rises through the ranks and clashes with the professionals before eventually proving themselves over multiple games. However, there's one really bad game which breaks things up, but the team then comes back swinging with a final masterpiece where they usually win within the final second, and there's epic slow-mo as they do so. Yeah, that's a pretty common story formula, and that is exactly how GOAT played out, right down to the epic slow-mo finale where the team wins in the final second, which is such a cliche that it's kind of eye-rolling. Oh, and speaking of these cliches, I definitely think that the whole breakup scene that comes about after Jett's crash out on the court was really played out, especially since by the end, everyone rejoined the team almost immediately, so the whole breakup felt kinda pointless. And speaking of the team, I admittedly also felt like the side characters left a lot to be desired. There's definitely some which I think work for what's required of them within the story, like Daryl and Hannah, who aren't the deepest characters ever, but they work as fun constants within Will's life who cheer him on from the sidelines. But the other players on the Thorns don't really have much else to them outside of very simple character traits. They're all very entertaining, don't get me wrong, but they don't stand out too much, and definitely pale in comparison to Will and Jett. Oh, and then there's Main Attraction, who is probably the most mid-antagonist I've seen in ages. I feel next to nothing about this guy, other than his name is kinda funny I suppose. He is the most generic antagonist that a sports movie could possibly have, and you could take him out of the movie and things would stay pretty similar. His only importance within the film is circumstantial, as his presence allows other characters to grow within the narrative, like with how Jett gets a chance to show her growth when she disses him on the livestream. But he doesn't pose much of a personal and active threat to the characters, outside of simply being a really good raw ball player. Strangely enough, I think he would have worked much better within the film if he was less antagonistic, and was more like, I don't know, Apollo Creed or something. Just a really good player who rivals the protagonist in a realistic feeling way. Because honestly, I don't think he needed to be the antagonist when Flo filled up that role perfectly well. She's the character I found myself hating the most, as she is the absolute worst, which was intentional. But instead, in an attempt to make Main Attraction the antagonist, we've ended up with a character who I completely forgot was even in the movie until I rewatched it. Although, to be fair to this character, I did admittedly find the Goat Tears diss track to be kinda funny. Now, it's definitely not a good song objectively, but I don't think it was trying to be. I mean, Lenny did explicitly call the lyrics mid, and he's right. But I find it hilarious on an ironic level, as it is just so pathetic. But on the whole, I'd say that a lot of this film's narrative blended in with many other similar films, and if you wanted a subversive sports movie, you're not gonna get it here. However, After reflecting on things, I don't actually mind how standard this film is, as I think it executes its simple story really well, to the point that I still enjoy the overall package regardless. And with that point made, I think it's about time that I finally discuss why I actually like this movie. Honestly, the simple truth is that I just have fun whenever I watch this film, and that was what I wanted the most out of this experience. As I said before, I find so many sports movies too self-serious and dull for my liking. Obviously you'll occasionally get ones like Rocky which I think are legitimately interesting and worthwhile, but when it comes to the many sports films with the standard formula I mentioned before, I personally tend to gravitate towards the funnier and more light-hearted sports movies. Think of things like Cool Runnings or Eddie the Eagle. They definitely aren't the most standout films ever made, but they are really fun watches which I can very easily return to. And this style is what I was hoping that GOAT would be like, as I certainly wasn't expecting it to be Raging Bull or anything, and I think it definitely delivered on being entertaining. I know I said that the jokes were a bit hit and miss here, but I can still safely say that I was having a good time throughout and was laughing along to many moments. I often got a laugh out of seeing these animal characters act like the animals they're meant to be, particularly whenever Jett acts like a cat. That was consistently really funny and cute. And alongside that, a lot of my personal entertainment came from how transfixed I was by the visuals, as the animation here really does do a great job at actually getting me to care about sports. Now, I don't personally watch sports, as I would rather watch literally anything else, but a good sports movie can get you to care about what you're watching, even if you normally wouldn't. And I think that one way these kinds of films do that is by allowing the audience to feel like they are a part of the action. F1 from last year actually did a really good job of this. Yes, I do agree that it's a standard sports movie and was easily the weakest of last year's Best Picture lineup, but I nonetheless really enjoyed this film because I found it exciting. And I found it exciting because the film made you feel like you were in the car with Brad Pitt. The direction, the cinematography, and particularly the sound design was created to immerse you into the race by putting you within the action. You're not merely an observer within this film, you are part of the experience, and that's why I got invested in what it had to show to me. The film's presentation made me care, and GOAT is very much the same in that regard. I do not care for basketball at all. I was always the kid who got hit square in the face by the ball after all. And unlike racing, which is inherently cool to me because fast cars go vroom, it would take something very special to get me to actually care about basketball. So what does GOAT do to get me to care? Well, it does two things. First of all, it inherently makes the sport more exciting by changing it to Rollerball. This use of a fictional sport that's loosely based on a real one is a great way to allow the creative team for this film to just go off the wall with implementing unique custom rules and locations in order to help the visual identity of this film to stand out. Instead of simply bouncing a ball across a regular court, this film allows its animal characters to use their own unique abilities to succeed at the game. And it also features a wide array of different courts which all have their own dangers that the characters need to deal with. We've got an underground court with fallen stalactites, a desert court with sandstorm limiting visibility, an ice court where the ground can break, and a literal volcano court with lava everywhere. This obviously wouldn't be permitted in the real world because, you know, health and safety and all that. But the creative team took advantage of the fact that this film isn't the real world, and instead had fun crafting all of these absurdly dangerous but cool looking courts. And that's what makes the games even more exciting to watch, as it's got all this added danger to it. It weirdly reminded me of the kind of environments that you would get from a Mario sports game, and I just thought that it was cool to see a similar kind of court layout within a film like this. But alongside the creative and exciting courts, the main reason why the film hooks me in during the game scenes is because of the direction and animation. Now, I've talked extensively about how much I love the current 2.5D style of animation that's being used a lot within the industry, particularly within Sony, and I think that GOAT is another great example of this technique. First of all, its art style is really nice to look at and still feels unique and unlike other similar movies. It's probably closest in style to TMNT Mutant Mayhem, but it still looks wildly different and more colourful. But what this kind of animation excels at the most is its unique presentation during action scenes, as it can include shots which just wouldn't be possible within live action. Now obviously, GOAT isn't an action movie, but it still uses the same kinds of animation techniques within the games, and it just looks so cool. In a live action film, if you wanted cool shots of a basketball game, you could do it, but you are limited by the rules of reality. You can't have a camera moving all over the court showing players on top form, as that's just simply not practical. But in animation, you don't have to worry about that. GOAT is able to immerse the audience within the game itself, as we can get really close to the action. We can directly follow the ball and the players, and the strong direction allows the audience to feel what it's like to be within the game itself. Let's put it this way, most of the time you have to watch a basketball game from afar like Daryl and Hannah do in this movie. But thanks to the limitless nature of animation, this film allows you to feel like you're a part of the game alongside Will and Jett. That's what I find really cool here, and that is ultimately the reason for why this film gets me to care about sport that I don't usually care for. Its presentation is just so exciting and close to the action that I'm able to feel the thrill that the characters likely feel. Yet the film never goes too over the top with its showcase of the raw ball games, as the creative team still made the effort to ensure that the basic outline of the game felt like real basketball. So much so that there were basketball consultants on the team who helped the animators to plan out all of the action. The mix between realistic game strategy, absurdist environments, and cool, fluid, exciting animation techniques all work together within this film to make the overall experience really cool for me. So, on the whole, GOAT did the impossible and actually got me to care about basketball. But cool sports action is nothing without good characters to follow. Luckily, the cast of this film is so charming and endearing for me, and that includes both the main characters and the quirky side characters who I consistently find myself enjoying the scenes of. Such characters include Coach Dennis, played by voice acting legend Patton Oswalt, who is as endearing with his performance as he always is, and I really like the mix of the meekness in the first half to the manic energy in the second. And speaking of manic energy, I already mentioned that I really enjoy Daryl and Hannah and their role as Will's consistent support network, but even on their own, I just always enjoy seeing them appear throughout the story. Also, as an aside, can I just say that Hannah is so lesbian coded? I don't know how to describe it, she just gives me that vibe. Plus, just look at that face she makes when Jett enters the diner. Yeah, she definitely fancies Jett. And honestly, who can blame her? Awooga! And if you're mad that I'm headcanoning queer characters in this movie, grow up. However, whilst I enjoy these characters, my absolute favourite one is, without a shadow of a doubt, Modo. Oh my goodness, I love this weird, crazy, iconic Komodo dragon so much. Every line from him is gold, and it contributes to most of the laughs that I get out of this movie. Oh, and his voice is amazing, and I love impersonating him.
What can I say? Modo is icon, and if you want any more of a snack, he'd eat himself.
Marry me, Modo! Out of everyone in the Thorns team, Modo is definitely the standout for me, largely because I find him so funny. But I do still enjoy the presence of all the other team members, even in spite of them not being the deepest characters in the world. Archie gives us a fun contrast between a tough player and a soft dad. Olivia is played by Nicola Coughlan, which makes me happy as a Derry Girls fan. Also, I think she's a great reflection of how modern sporting has been impacted by social media, with the players being affected by what's said online. And then we've got Lenny, who not only spits straight bars and has a nice chill face amongst all the chaos, but he's also played by the real basketball legend and executive producer on this film, Stephen Curry, who's a large reason for why the film ended up the way that it did. Obviously, he helped a lot to get the project off the ground by working as a producer, but some of the basketball techniques and mannerisms that are used within this film were modelled off of Curry's own playing style, and Will's journey within the narrative also paralleled a lot of Curry's own personal journey of starting out as the underrated Little League player who believed in himself enough to eventually make it big. And with that comment made, let's finally talk about the GOAT himself, Will Harris.
That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
Now, Will isn't the most standout underdog protagonist in fiction, as his struggles within the film are rather simple and external. He's always shown to be a strong player who just needs a chance to prove himself to the dismissive public, and once he gets that chance, he's able to easily remain on top thanks to his consistently strong abilities, and he only gets let down by the actions of others rather than because of his own mistakes. As a result of this, his personal character journey isn't really anything too crazy, as he doesn't need to change that much within the narrative. Instead, I think his story is interesting to watch because it shows the audience that the kind of talent that Will has can truly come from anywhere. Will's background and small stature doesn't deter him, and instead, he continues to dream big and remains confident in his own abilities. He's always willing to push himself, and he approaches each new opportunity with a big smile on his face, and that's why he's so great to follow. He represents the everyman, or every goat in this case, and shows what is possible, whilst also being an immensely endearing and likeable character to follow thanks to his endless optimism and positive energy. Plus, I think his personality also bounces off the other characters really well, and it's clear that he's had a positive influence on the rest of the Thorns, as he's the one who arguably saves the team by the end. Whilst the main thematic purpose of Will's character is to show that strong players can come from anywhere, the film also shows us that raw talent isn't everything. By the end of the film, Jett is still shown to be a more talented player than Will, but that's not what's important. Instead, Will's actions feel the most significant, as it was his positive attitude towards himself and others which is what ultimately got him so far and was what saved the team. His great personality gave a chance for the other characters to grow, and I think that's why he's so great to follow as the protagonist here. He's likeable and easy to root for, and his influence on the overall narrative is strong to see. Even though his own personal character journey was quite simple, his presence was still strong and enjoyable to watch. However, whilst Will is great, I would argue that Jett Fillmore is the most well-realised character from the whole film, and is arguably the one who goes through the most change, which is surprising for an underdog sports movie, as it's usually the underdog who goes through these changes, not the older mentor. But that's why I find Jett to be so interesting, and she's a neat contrast to what other films would have. I mean, first of all, it's cool that the idol for our male protagonist is actually a female player who isn't mistreated by any of the characters. The film treats Jett's success with dignity, and it shows us her raw skill so we understand how good of a player she actually is, rather than just telling us, oh yeah, she's a good player. We understand without question why she has earned her success, and honestly, I think that's a great piece of simple yet effective representation, and it's just cool to see it within a film like this. But beyond that, I feel like there's quite a bit of complexity to Jett's character, which thus makes her sympathetic and interesting to me, and so much more than just a typical curmudgeon who needs to learn to accept Will as part of the team. While she does initially write Will off because of his size and her own ignorance to his abilities, you nonetheless sympathise with her, as it's pretty clear that a lot of her negative feelings came about from her own insecurities. Despite getting on in her years, Jett still holds on tight to the game and doesn't want to quit it. It's clear that it's something that she loves doing, which means that she doesn't want to move on and retire. She's absolutely terrified of the idea that she could potentially be washed up and done for, and this thought constantly plays in her mind, and it's also something that Flo gladly takes advantage of in order to mess with her head. It's a very relatable fear for a lot of people, and I think it helps to explain a lot of a negative attitude towards Will in the first half. She's afraid of change as she's stuck in the past, stuck in the glory days if you will. She's so used to being the top player that she's not used to the idea of passing on the torch to someone younger like Will, and she's not quite ready to adopt a new game strategy, as that requires her to step out of her comfort zone, and considering her insecurities, you can understand why she clings on to that comfort zone. But as the film progresses, she embraces the necessary changes and realises that she doesn't need to worry about becoming a has-been, as there are many people who still value her presence. And I think that this idea is conveyed brilliantly within the scene where Will takes Jett to the diner, and she gets to meet all of the Thorns fans who talk about how much they love what she does on the court. Honestly, I think that this may be my favourite part of the movie, as it's just really sweet and is an effective catalyst for Jett's growth as a character, and it also does a great job at showing the impact of legacy and how the past will live on, but you still need to move forward and continue to dream big. Again, the ideas of this film are quite commonplace, but I nonetheless found it effective because it's executed really well thanks to these compelling, likeable, well-realised characters. And with that final point made, I think I've covered everything that I wanted to say about this movie. Now, at the start of this video, I asked the question of why is this movie, of all things, stuck with me in spite of its relative simplicity and flaws. Well, I think that the reason for why I like Goats so much is because it's a great example of a film which isn't trying to be the most complex or life-changing movie ever made, but is nonetheless successful in what it sets out to achieve. The filmmakers have said many times that they created this film with the mindset that it will be this generation's underdog story, and I think it works really well as that. The underdog story is an inherently inspiring kind of story which can motivate you to dream big or show you that you are capable of greatness no matter where you come from, and Go provides yet another great example of these messages. Whilst it's not a movie that I necessarily need in my current life, as I've already learnt this lesson, I still think that it's great for the next generation to be able to turn to this film in their formative years and hopefully get something out of it. And I also think that Will is just a great character to follow in the footsteps of. And, as I said before, I also think it's great that Jett exists as a prominent, talented female sports player within a mainstream animated film. This film is filled with great, likeable characters for kids to look up to and be inspired by within these difficult times. And hell, even I can be a bit inspired by Will's positive personality and mindset, and I just know that this whole film will have a strong impact in one way or another, and that's why I appreciate its existence. But also, on a personal level, I definitely think that I liked this film so much because it just appealed to me in a lot of different ways. Not only is it a furry movie which I always enjoy watching, but I've also just found myself really gravitating towards these characters, and I think that the overall optimism and enthusiasm of this film is just infectious and has led to it becoming quite a comforting watch for me. And that's the main reason for why I can see myself returning to it in the future. Plus, as an animation fan, it's always a treat to watch a film that's this dripping in style and visual splendour. So overall, I really like Goat, and I will continue to like it in the future. I'm not expecting everyone else to love it, but it's a film that I personally find immensely comforting, rewatchable, and endearing. And with that being said, I'm going to round off this video by saying one more thing. Roots run deep! Roots run deep!